morning, everyone. Welcome to episode 185 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I have my regular special guest every other Friday, Lynn. She's a historian, geopolitical analyst, and author, and she has some expertise on history. And we're going to talk about neo-colonialism, colonialism, imperialism, and how it has changed really since probably the current global order that, started in 1945 after World War II, and then especially changed one more time with the dismantling of the Soviet Union. But in the image that we put for this episode, it shows, all the resources from Africa and really Central and South America really being piled on top of the continents of Europe and the United States. And so, a picture says 1,000 words, but that's really our topic. It's a broad one. That's what we're going to get into. Christine, can I just ask you at the outset here, how and why has colonialism changed? So back in the day, it was, they would put militaries everywhere, and they would, appoint a governor of the colony, and they would just run that colony. So how and why has that paradigm changed?
Okay. Well, you made reference to it yourself. And first of all, hello to all of our audience. Glad you're joining us today, or those who are watching it on the recording. I think it's a really important topic we're discussing today, because most people think that colonialism is something that ended long ago. And they think only, as you were referencing, the British, the French empires. They think about it, of course, exactly, perfect illustration, because it was always about taking those resources, extracting them, openly for the benefit of, whatever the dominating country was. And the United States has done that, but most certainly in Europe history. But that is actually an incomplete definition, because even though at that time it was, like you said, flags and governors, the broader definition of colonialism, which is completely in existence today, was defined by control. So it is simply the ability of one nation to assert its power to decide how other people are going to live and who's going to govern them, how their resources are used. And in the past, it was by that direct control, territorial control. But now, of course, it comes from that economic control, or else the threat of force. That really changed, as you made mention of, after World War II, because let's say the logic of such evil countries, really, that would want to be a colonialist power, that didn't change. Their logic on what they're doing, but the form of colonialism changed. And so because territorial control kind of became discredited after World War II, so the idea of empire and colonialism simply adapted. But when you take a look at it, I'd have to say that the neo-colonialism, which, we really make reference to the control economically, and think about it. We've got the International Monetary Fund. We have WEF. We have all of these economic controls, and countries that willingly, after World War II, again, very good that you mentioned that in your opening statement, willingly subjected themselves to essentially become colonies of the United States. And once they allow that full integration of U.S. military bases, they essentially are colonies. So, when we go back and forth between, colonialism used to be about territory, but modern colonialism is simply about the economic control, the political control, and most importantly, the strategic control. It really hasn't changed. It's just the form that has changed.
And what again, why was that necessary? Why did they need to change the form?
Well, first of all, in some ways, in some places, it actually became, I would say, both morally, I put that in quote marks in regards to these countries, but in terms of their people's views of it after World War II, in terms of subjugation of people, in terms of the outright plantation ownership in these countries, after seeing what had happened in regards to, the concentration camps, the whole idea of the actual physical enslavement of people became out of vogue, if you will, among the populations, among the citizens. So I would say it kind of adapted. They did not want to be using the language of conquest as they did before, because after World War II and all the suffering, the idea of thinking about conquest was not something that people, took well to. So they just adapted. And I would say in also some ways it would outweigh the benefits. And if you can do it in, let's say, a more inexpensive way, then they would do so. And also the United States, which is, really going to be our focus today, wanted that hegemony, got that hegemony, and, decided on the best way to maintain it without actually taking the territory and military. But I would say, as we're all seeing right now, I think we're going from that neo-colonialism back to the original colonialism. When you take a look at what Trump is talking about, he is actually interested in the territory of other nations. Very dangerous. It's as if they don't have to obfuscate their actual intentions anymore by different words or different tactics.
I think one important angle to understand is that there is an ideological struggle after World War II. And so the United States, was the biggest beneficiary of World War II. World War II resulted in this really unearned privilege. It was earned by the sacrifice of the communists in China and the communists in the Soviet Union, who won World War II, against the Japanese fascists, against the German fascists. But at the end of World War II, the communists controlled a lot of land, and then the Cold War initiated an ideological struggle, and the West, said we are better, and it was a battle for hearts and minds. It was a battle for perception, an ideological war, and liberalism, again had to pretend that that it cared about these principles. And so that's why they couldn't get away anymore with this overt, colonialism, because, liberalism preached freedom and sovereignty and all these, it gave lip service to all these ideas that were really counter to the imperialist interests. But it was important during the Cold War to paint themselves like liberal Democrats. And so we saw, once the Cold War was won, once the Soviet Union was dismantled, we saw how the United States and the West has kind of not really cared so much about being, abiding by their allegedly liberal principles, right? The rule of law has gone out the window. The respect for sovereignty has gone out the window. I mean, it never was there, but they tried to, they did their best to hide it and justify all of their imperialist actions with these, based on these liberal principles. But now they don't even do that. And so we see, the changing, the dropping of the pretense that they care about liberalism, and they're just behaving more like rank imperialists. So talking about sovereignty, what is the importance of sovereignty? How do we define sovereignty now?
Well, I would say that true sovereignty would mean that a country has and chooses to, despite, which is very difficult, despite, the threats against it, maintains a control of its foreign policy, its monetary system, its military, its economic model in terms of the countries that it wants to interact with and trade, and essentially the ability to make decisions and making their independent decisions, and not letting those decisions be influenced by the threats against them. And I think the best way to think about sovereignty is to think about the examples in the world today. And to me, let's call it the most highly sovereign, if there's degrees on the spectrum, states right now are Russia and China and Iran and North Korea. I would put Pakistan in there. Then there's the heavily sanctioned ones. We see what happened to Venezuela. We see Cuba. But still, these are countries that we see maintaining those decision factors. Most countries in the world actually fail when you think about what sovereignty is. They might have one or two aspects of it, but if they are allowing, for example, usually the United States, of course, it's the United States, to control very important parts of how its country is run and the decisions that it makes, then it's not sovereign at all. Real sovereignty is not on paper. It's not about your flag or your borders or any of that and how much you want to claim independence and sovereignty as a nation. It's a matter of the functionality. And if they don't make their decisions, their economic policies and their foreign alignments independent of that, then they're not really free. If the coercion and the threat, sadly, if the idea of the punishment against them influences the decisions they make, then they're not sovereign. And I would say that there are very few sovereign states in the world today at all.
What are some of the ways that the United States or the West in general influences countries to, steal and rob them of their sovereignty? How do they do that?
Well, of course, I would say fundamentally, and it's really sad when you take a look at some of the countries, would be the IMF. I mean, there is no, once a country goes that way, we're talking about enslavement. I think back to Russia. It was so important when Putin became president that he made sure they paid off that debt. So they're not beholden to them. But when you think about the entire world, almost all of Europe, and I don't really think it's that much of a stretch to say is a U.S. colony. Now, it's a matter of the definitions and the vernacular you want to use, but they have a complete dependency on the U.S. for their security, their policies, economically. I think about South America, the economic, and Africa, as our illustration shows today. The degree of poverty that they're still having is an abomination in this world when they have so much, resources. But the United States, again, in that neo-colonialism, comes in and make sure that they set the prices and they have their essentially slave force without using those words. I would think about a good example right now, a prime example that people don't actually think of as a modern colony, but I would say Ukraine is a perfect example. I mean, we can think about the islands, American Samoa, Puerto Rico, but think about Ukraine. I mean, politically and militarily, that's colonialism. It's completely a managed zone. So they control it with their military. Once a country has willingly let U.S. military bases in there, what is it going to do? Right there would be a major conflict to ever get rid of them. That in itself puts them beholden and dependent. To become dependent on the United States is to completely give up your sovereignty right then and there. But when you take a look at the Eastern European countries and the Baltics, it's very sad that I think it was the dollar. And I think that it was the suffering and the economic suffering that they had, that they turned away from the potential they had to survive and, yes, suffer, but yet come out on the other end without choosing the United States. Because once you have chosen the United States, you look at Guatemala, Argentina, you have given up your sovereignty. So economically, that's the power right now. But of course, they have their NGOs operating, and there's always the threat of the bombs, as we see now with this reckless, crazy man called the President of the United States. So, it's just escalating in terms of what they use. But for many years, it's been the economic control, and they can claim they have elections and that they have constitutions. But none of these countries that we're talking about are sovereign nations anymore.
So just yesterday, I think Trump declared, a state of emergency or, a crisis related to Cuba. And, and it was the justification for increasing that embargo. And he says he's going to deny anybody giving, he's not going to let anyone transport oil to Cuba. So Mexico gives oil to Cuba. Venezuela gives oil to Cuba. He says he's cutting Cuba off. He's going to, initiate a trade embargo, and he's upping the sanctions too. So economics is definitely one way that, the new colonialism works and the new imperialism. So we talked about the IMF, the World Bank, and the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency. And the system that was put in place post World War II gave the United States a whole bunch of power and control over the global economy. And it really handed them the ability to pick winners and losers and to decide who is going to be prosperous and be able to develop and who is not going to. And of course, if you are a country that does not do what we want, then you're going to be targeted, and we are going to use our global system that we have large control over, and we're going to, use these tools at our, that are in our power to use, and we're going to hurt you and punish you, and we're going to try and turn the people against you. We're going to bring misery, and so and that's what we've been doing to Cuba since the 50s, right? The embargo started once they overthrew our dictator Batista. We've been, embargoing them and trying to punish them for maintaining their sovereignty. I mean, that's essentially what their big crime is that they're sovereign and they're not going to, be our vassal. I wanted to mention this really great documentary. I've mentioned it on our show before. It's called Life and Debt, and it's about Jamaica. I think, and Jamaica, nobody really, we never went to war with Jamaica, but here's what happens. And this is another illustration of how neocolonialism works and how we maintain a global empire without putting, boots on the ground and a viceroy in charge. So there was a president in Jamaica, and we really wanted him to implement free trade, because with free trade, that is how we make dependent. That's how we make societies and nations dependent on our economy, right? So free trade was a Trojan horse, designed to indenture, all these other smaller countries and make them dependent on Western corporations. And so it, expands the, it'll increase the market, right? So a Western corporation now has this other, entire society or country, in this case, Jamaica, to buy its goods. So the president refused to implement these policies. And so essentially there was a coup. That president gets overthrown, and then we had a person waiting in the wings to take his place. So all of this was done behind the scenes politically and with the CIA. So we got in a government that will do our bidding, and they implemented these policies, these free trade policies. So they opened up their markets to Western exports like rice and sugar and things like that, and that had the benefit of destroying domestic production. So domestic agriculture production, domestic milk production, domestic rice production, and all the things that they would make and then consume themselves. All of those those industries were destroyed in Jamaica. So that had the added benefit for the United States of having a whole bunch of unemployed, unhappy, poor people in Jamaica. And so then you bring in the sweatshops. So you bring in Nike, you bring in all these other things, and now all these unemployed people who used to produce, food and things like that for the people, now all those people have to go work in your sweatshops, and they don't really have a choice. So you can kind of see how they flooded Jamaica with these cheap goods that the domestic producers could not match as far as price goes. And this, of course, ended up, making all those industries going bankrupt. And eventually they were no longer in existence. So they were no longer producing domestically. And they were then, dependent on these foreign exports. Well, what do you think the corporations do once you have a market that's dependent on your exports? Well, you raise the price. You undercut for a couple of years until everybody goes out of business, and then you raise the price. And so that's exactly, what happened. And it's insidious. And Jamaica is just one illustration of how that happens around the globe. But it's a great documentary showing exactly how it happens. And it's called Life and Debt. So I encourage everybody to watch that. But it's a good, it's just a great illustration of how neocolonialism works. I had a bunch of other thoughts, Christine, but let me ask you, so what I just explained, people are confused by neocolonialism. A lot of people don't think it exists. They think that states are sovereign and they're just of their own free will, aligning with the United States because they want to be free, right? So, what is it about this new system that confuses people and keeps them from really recognizing what's going on?
Well, I think that a lot of it has to do with the carefully chosen language. Right now, what they have used, and since just like what you just now shared about Jamaica many times over, when you take a look at the banana republics, and then all of the regime changes, but now they're using words like peace and humanitarian aid and security and reconstruction and investment. They phrase it in ways that Americans who aren't as aware about what the actual definition of colonialism, be it colonialism, neocolonialism, however you want to refer to it, but they disguise the intent of the complete control of another nation and the exploitation of another nation by using these words that sound really good. When you think about humanitarian aid and peace and security for another nation, we're going to go and help these poor, suffering people. And Americans who know nothing about history, don't care to learn that, and don't think deeper than what their news tells them and their politicians, their media tells them, actually start to believe that the United States is a force for good in this world. And so I think that's why it's very important that we stress, and everybody stress, the idea that this is colonialism, because I think most people, if they gave it thought, understand the evil of colonialism, but they use this lying language to conceal what the actual truth and the intent is. I would say, let's look at it, what's going on right now in Gaza. And you take a look at all of the words that are being used. It's a perfect example right now of modern colonialism. They displaced the population. They then start to talk about all the territory, the land being underutilized. And then they start bringing in the words of the peace and this, quote, peace board nonsense. And we're going to help the people, and we're finally going to feed them, and we're going to give them security. What is the word they're using? Reconstruction. We're going to put investment there as if it's a good thing. And Americans hear that, and it is intended, and effectively so for many Americans, to make them start to switch to, again, the United States is going to come in here and rescue the suffering people. When on when you take a look at it, the housing, and go back to what you were saying about Jamaica, in terms of Gaza, the housing is conditional. It may come later. It may be years from now. But what's not going to be years from now, just in the first 3 years, is going to be the land ownership, the development, the focus on profit. That's what it's going to be. So the Gazan people aren't going to have any say-so, no responsibility, no control whatsoever, no consent being given to this. And yet it's given to the Americans with all of the language as if we are coming in there to help. So again, it's going to be complete control. Some people are going to be duped into thinking that this is good and helping the people. And as I was saying to what you said happened to the people of Jamaica, same thing is going to happen when they start talking about the thousands of jobs that they're going to produce. Yeah, you're going to, after you've already murdered tens of thousands of them, then you're going to give the remaining ones an opportunity to essentially become enslaved labor for the profit of all of these people. When you take a look at that board, it is an abomination. It is disgusting. But again, I say this because it is a perfect example of modern colonialism. And yet, the whole future of these people isn't being chosen by them. It is being imposed upon them by the United States. And I think it's just very important that we get it through people's understanding. This is colonialism. This is evil. There is nothing good about what Trump is proposing for Gaza. Nothing good whatsoever. Yeah. It's only going to be about profit. And that is built upon the bodies of the dead, of the murdered.
You triggered two broad thoughts, and I'm going to do my best to speak to them. So the first one was just about the propaganda industry and the global propaganda apparatus that is highly effective and highly efficient in the United States, headquartered in the West, really, but it really spans the globe. And so it is such an effective propaganda apparatus, and it is just constantly and unremittingly, putting forth the justification, the false justification for all these things. And so really, I don't know. I call it liberalism, and a lot of people don't understand that. And so I hate to talk in ways that aren't going to make sense to a lot of people. But I mean, it's just, it's like the religion of liberalism, where the West cares about these values, and that's what they're really after. And then they, everything they say and all the justifications for all these immoral acts are constantly being justified around the world, based on these principles. And so, people that don't really know what's going on, or don't really need to know what's going on, just absorb it, and they buy into it, and then it makes sense to them. Like, yeah, well, I mean, democracy's good. Like, you don't want the people of Iran, to get out from underneath these evil freaking mullahs and the ayatollahs. Like, come on, let the people be free. I mean, we should help them anyway. So no, it's insidious, because it's pandering to a mindset that they have spent generations, creating. And so this propaganda apparatus really, is a huge problem, but you got to be cognizant of it. You have to understand the role it plays in facilitating, this neo-colonialism, neo-imperialism. And then the other important aspect, the other important dynamic is the reality of oppositional class interests, and how in each of these countries, there's a wealthy elite whose interests are in alignment with the interests of the West. And it's those wealthy elite who we utilize and we count on. They come here, they educate their kids in our schools, they go back to their countries, and they're going to be the new government. And they're going to facilitate the extraction of wealth from their country to our country, and they're going to benefit from it. These elites are going to benefit from this exploitative relationship, where all of everything we want from that country gets, transferred over to our country. The people get screwed, but these wealthy elites are the ones that are getting paid off, and they're benefiting tremendously. And then they have the backing of the CIA, the US military, and they're protected. And so the people in that country are going to be attacked and murdered, mercilessly, if they try and stand up and demand sovereignty and demand a government that actually represents them. This is the dynamic. This is a paradigm that really happens in every African country, except for the ones that have overthrown it, like Niger. Thankfully, we see in the Sahel region that, governments are coming to power that are rejecting this. But I mean, this is the reality that people have lived with, in all of these developing countries for generations. And so, it's invisible. It is invisible to, regular people in Europe, regular people in the United States. They don't see this, but it is the actual dynamic that's at play. So those were the two things: was how we use the elite minority in each country as, we put them in power, and then they facilitate, what we want to have happen, the extraction and the exploitation. And then and again, it's all coded over, and it's all justified by this huge world global propaganda apparatus that never talks about this obvious reality. Okay, Chrissy, thank you for listening.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just see exactly what you described in terms of those countries that had the potential or still have the potential, and yet we see them going deeper and deeper into putting capitalism as their priority, and thus, getting that entanglement with the United States in degrees that they cannot even anticipate what may come of their country as a result of that. They're looking for short-term financial benefits. And that is the tragedy of it, because if some of these countries look back at their great histories, it was when they chose differently that they had the most power. And there are lessons to be learned there, to go back and make a new, let's say, if you will, a new combination. But I don't see that, because as you so accurately pointed out, those in power often, of course, are the ones benefiting, and they're not going to do that. In regards to that insidious propaganda, you are so right. We all know this. But my important aspect that I always share when I think about that is also the fact that, yes, that is a given, but it has been my experience over many decades that many of the American people are willfully ignorant. When you said they fail to see what the reality is, that's true, but that is because they have chosen to be blind and put the blinders on to keep them from seeing it. And when I say that, one could counter it and say, well, it's the propaganda. Yes, the propaganda is there, but one can always choose again. As soon as a fact, as soon as something instance, and if you're at all have any mental activity, intellectual, and wanting to know about history, you're going to find plenty of them that would make you go question and find out that truth. So I would have to say, for the most part now, I think it is a willful blindness. There are still those, and that is why we do a show like this, and other people do what they can to reach people, to make them start to think and question. But there are many in the United States that won't question a thing. You do not challenge their alliance with the American flag whatsoever. The facts do not matter to them, Billy Bob. I used to be somebody who was far more like optimistic that education is what the American people needed. I no longer feel that way. For a small percentage, and that's important, it is, and they can be reached. Because you and I and our listeners grew up with all of that indoctrination, but there came a point in our life, unless, you had been raised that way from someone who was already enlightened. But it came a point in your life where you began to question it yourself. There are still those out there, and they can be in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and for the first time, they start to question it. So they're open to understanding all of this and then becoming aware of who really actually is good in this world versus those who are actually committing the evil. But I still think that most of them do not want that. They will vehemently fight you in their words or otherwise, if you were face to face with them, when you challenge their belief that the United States is a force for good in this world. And they don't care what the facts are, Billy Bob. And I've just had so many experiences in my life that's where I've come to now. But I still do what I do, and I admire all of those who are doing whatever they can. Because there are people who would question, once you get that question, they're still capable of it. I've said it on previous shows. Critical thinking is not a skill of most Americans. So I don't put it all to the indoctrination. The indoctrination is a given. You are right. I mean, it's massive. It had its great effect. But still, people have a mind, and you can question, and most Americans don't even want to. And that's very sad. So that is what my comments would be on your comment there.
Yeah, it's kind of like they have the luxury, right? They have the luxury of not needing to care and lying to themselves and just wanting to believe that lie. And they do, because at one point I didn't know what was going on. And it became apparent that what I was being told is going on isn't what's going on. And then I tried to figure out what's going on. And I think I have a pretty good idea. And I think most people can do that, right? I don't think I'm special. I think I had an actual interest in figuring things out. And I think there are those people, right, that are genuinely want to know what is going on. But yeah, I think that is unfortunately very small minority of people. And the rest of the people are happy to lie to themselves as long as their own world is not intruded upon. And so again, I think that's a luxury that a lot of people might not be having for too much longer in the future as our planet gets a little bit crazy. I mean, we'll see. I don't want to be a doom and gloom person, but I mean, I think it's very possible that this luxury that people have had not being informed is going to come to an abrupt end. And people are all of a sudden going to be having to figure out what's going on and not knowing. And then that's going to be a problem because, you're going to have, again, the mainstream narratives blaming, China for our economic global collapse, or blaming Iran for our economic global collapse when it's going to be, our own government and this neocolonial imperialism that is responsible. So I mean, so there's the reality of a neocolonialism and And there's this huge propaganda effort to conceal it and to obfuscate it behind liberal language of peace, democracy, prosperity, economic freedom, rights, human rights. Like, these are the buzzwords that are just shoved down everybody's throat in order to justify and facilitate, rank imperialism and the exploitation of other societies, the economic exploitation, and really, regime changes, and all of this imperialism. What is the whole point is, it's a different kind of imperialism than it was 100 years ago. But it's more insidious. It's like you said at the very outset of the show, it's the same mentality behind it, the same drive, the same forces pushing it, but it's just being justified and implemented in a little bit different way. I did want to touch on the World Bank and the IMF and the World Economic Forum. These are all instruments of private wealth, right? That are designed to control markets, resources, and governments. And so the government, like you were talking about, the debt, right? So they'll take out a loan from the World Bank, and then those loans, of course, come with tremendous strings attached. And so, the book by John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, get really deep and well documented into how that process works. But essentially, these global, institutions that are ostensibly designed to, bring development and prosperity do the exact opposite. They bring imperial subordination and they bring poverty to these different countries, and the strings attached to these loans. It's like, well, we're going to tell you how you spend this money. We're going to tell you how you need to vote at the United Nations. We're going to tell you what kind of policies you have to implement, your foreign policy, your domestic policy. So all these strings attached, is again another mechanism for how the West has controlled, the planet, and, through this neo-colonialism. What was my other point? It escapes me. But I know. Well, China. So China represented a weakening of that particular structure, because China started offering loans to countries much cheaper and without strings attached. And of course, this is another reason why China is being targeted, because China is threatening to displace the Western imperialist system. And so that's so China's enemy number one. And I always argue that everything that we're seeing today geopolitically is really within the context of getting prepared to have a big showdown with China, and to ultimately do their best to weaken China and eliminate China as a rival and maintain Western imperialist hegemony throughout the rest of the 21st century. I mean, that's really that's the strategy that's taking place right now in Venezuela and Iran. It's all predicated on shaping the battlefield to deal with China. But let's talk about how this word imperialism is misused and abused by liberals. And they use this term towards Iran, right? Iran is imperialist. Look, Iran isn't Persian. They've got Baluchis, they've got Arabs, they've got all these other things. They're imperialist. What Russia is an imperialist country. Like, they have they need to be split up into 5 different countries. So each ethnicity, and the same thing with China. China's imperialist. We need to break China up. So, can you help explain where they get wrong this idea of imperialism?
Well, of course, it is given to them. And once they identify such nations as imperialist or authoritarian and dictatorships, as if in itself, that's even, in itself is laden with their definitions of it as if it's bad. It's given to them, and they don't question it. They don't understand, as you just now clearly pointed out, like getting a load and going into business with China is very different than with the United States. Same with Russia. Russia forms sovereign to sovereign partnerships. That's what China is doing. They don't try to have interference within their countries. They respect others. I always look at, Putin just met with the leader in Malaysia, I believe it was, and another leader from Sudan. And again, they're talking about corporation and technical corporation, but they do it through diplomacy, unlike the United States, which is always going to have a conditional relationship, social as well. That's a very interesting aspect too, that we really didn't get into. In all of their colonies, it is not only all the control you and I have already discussed, Billy Bob, but it is also the social aspects of the country, the traditions, the values, the belief systems. All of that changes as the United States takes control of such a nation. And then, of course, as we've already talked about, they can bully them, they can threaten them. And you mentioned earlier, I read that. I suggest everybody read what Billy Bob was discussing earlier from the White House, where Trump has just now said that Cuba is a threat to the United States. Now, you've got to really be stupid if you believe that. Okay. I mean, you do. I cannot give anyone the benefit of doubt who would accept that without just outright understanding how absurd it is. And as to countries like Russia and China, when they try to put these laden words on them, emotionally laden words, the United States and the other countries, France, Germany, the ones who identify other nations like Iran, or even talking about Russia in these what are negatively laden terminologies, are the worst perpetrators of colonialism historically in the world, current and in the past. And if they can make Americans believe these falsehoods about another person's government, then they can do anything that they want. And that is why it's so important for those who do care about the truth, and that's the definition, those who care about the truth in their life and are willing to question themselves. That's how you grow. They can be reached and understand that all of this is actually wrong, and they can see through it. You know, it's like that story where the emperor has no clothes. Nobody wants to say it, but you gotta say it when you see that the United States is not the force for good. It is the force for evil. And interestingly enough, as you said, think about Iran, think about North Korea, Russia and China, of course, but focusing upon Iran now, very dangerous situation, especially, you know, with the way the United States is behaving now. You just see the use of the words, and very few Americans even question it. They're like, you described it perfectly. They're like, who wouldn't want them to have democracy? Americans don't know what a republic is. They don't know what a democracy is. And what they think is a democracy is the idea of being able to go out and get some munchy crunchies and drink and relax on the weekend. Nothing wrong with that, mind you. But that to me is what they live for, instead of what is the truth and what's making that possible. Do you really want to live your, quote, good life at the expense of other people? I think most people actually, if that question was pressed into their heart, they would say yes. But there are a few who would say no. And as soon as they become aware of it, they're going to reject what the United States is doing when Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, anywhere for that matter, Ukraine. But you see the hypocrisy, and they're trying to make people think these countries like Russia and China have hypocrisy. You take a look at their histories. No, nothing like what the United States has done. They have, even in their earliest years, in their expansion, it was more like integration. Yes, there were bad things that happened, especially under the czars in the Russian Empire. But even then, they did not go so far as to go across the seas and enslave people. It's not in the people. These are very different people, Chinese and Russians and Iranians, and they have a respect for themselves. And if you don't respect yourself, you're not going to respect others. Look at what we've got in the White House right now. That thing doesn't have any respect for itself. It cares nothing about what it appears. It is a consumer, a mass consumer. And most Americans are happy to be called consumers. That's why they put it in office. So I do have a dismal outlook for the United States. And I really go back to Iran. Every American thinks they know what Iran's about. But let's just look at the history. When the regime was overturned in the coup and they instilled the Shah of Iran, do most Americans know the evil, the atrocities committed by the Shah of Iran? And now we see his despicable son all of a sudden showing his face on American news stories being interviewed. They're getting it ready. They're getting him perhaps ready to be the next Shah. And they don't even go back and think about the suffering that the Iranians, there was a reason the Iranian hostage crisis happened. And good for Iran, they identified the great Satan of the world as the United States. It always has been. But Americans recoil at that. They recoil at being called an empire. And yet they have to face the fact that is what it is. It's sad. If you want to choose again, then it's up to you, even as an individual, not to wave your flag and go along with it. And, I think it's very important that Americans, whatever you can do, whether it's just speaking or writing, that that truth. Don't align yourself with what the U.S. government is doing. So Iran, that is a big, dangerous happening right now. I'm actually very glad to see, I believe Pakistan has said they're going to stand with Iran. And you and I were talking off the air before we came on, and I've been saying this for a few decades now. The only protection a country has is nuclear weaponry against the United States. What did I say earlier? What are the nations that are sovereign? Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Pakistan. But Iran has to make its decision to what degree it wants to align with those who might be able to help them to a far greater capacity.
Yeah, it's very interesting to consider, the position that Donald Trump is in. Because ultimately, as the figurehead, for this Western empire, he's going to bear responsibility. Now, even if, he is not making these decisions, even if somebody else, a cabal is making the decisions in a back room behind him, he's still the figurehead and he's going to be held responsible. Mm-hmm. And so he's kind of in a dangerous position, because I don't think I think he's a narcissist. I think he cares about wanting the American people to think he's the greatest ever. Almost every tweet he's tweeting is just telling the American people how awesome he is and he's the best ever. So I think he cares, right? He cares about his legacy. He cares about, how he looks. And I think, he's in big danger of looking bad if he attacks Iran and Iran responds, by blocking the Strait of Hormuz and by, just taking all of the energy infrastructure in the Middle East offline. Like, that's going to be terrible for the global economy, and Trump is going to get a lot of criticism and blame. Now, Israel's going to be extremely happy, because then they've pulled Trump into this war, and now Trump's going to really have to go to war. Like, he's going to have to mobilize, but that's going to piss people off, and it's going to put him in a very bad position he doesn't want to be in. So what is he going to do? I mean, it is just extremely riveting to see if he does anything tonight specifically. If nothing happens today or tonight, I expect we're good for at least a week before something happens again. But yeah, and then, I mean, ultimately they have to, if they're going to weaken China, if they're going to significantly harm China's economy, you can't harm China's economy without collapsing the global economy. So you have to make a decision. Am I willing to sacrifice the global economy to harm my peer rival? And I think they're willing to do it. And so, but again, you're not going to be able to do that without harming the global economy. And then whoever does that is going to have a lot of criticism, a lot of people angry at them. So it's just, it's not easy running an empire. Empire ain't easy. And so, but it's just fascinating to watch it play out. Now, I wanted to make another point. Who does the empire represent? The empire represents the oligarch class, the wealthiest owners of the banks, of the industries. It's comprised of innumerable different factions that have, competing interests, but they also have overlapping interests. And the overlapping interests are that we want to maintain political control in the hands of those who represent the wealthy elite. They don't want democracy. So as part of their overlapping interests is to crush democracy, right? Democracy is when the majority of the will of the majority is what is able to influence the government, and they oppose that. So what we have in the West is oligarchy. It calls itself democracy, but it's really in direct opposition to democracy. Now, you made a point earlier that you said something like to the effect of, I don't want to have a good life at the benefit of other people being immiserated, right? You didn't use those words, but this was the idea that you were at the expense,
at the expense of others,
and that's exactly right. So I think, in the United States, because of the sacrifice of the communists in World War II, the United States was this tremendous beneficiary of that sacrifice. And the United States has accounted for half of the global economy and only 5% of the global population. So with that tremendous what's that word? Inequality. I mean, it's a huge, tremendous, unequal. They're big beneficiaries of this wealth inequality. They have really, used that vast disproportion of wealth to not do good things, right? They've really used that vast disproportion of wealth to benefit the interests of the already wealthy. So people in the United States, our lives aren't that bad for a few of us, right? Like if you're in the 90th percentile of income, your life is pretty good. And you think to yourself, and you want to think to yourself, it's in your material interest to think that, well, this system is good. I mean, look at me. I'm doing good. Like who's to say? But like that is just such an ignorant and brainless, unthinking, thoughtless way of perceiving reality, because the reality is that, if you're in the 90th percentile, in the United States, it's true that the government, I wouldn't want to say cares about your interest, because they really care about the interest of the 0.1%, but you're a beneficiary of that whole system. But it is at the direct expense of the rest of the planet. It's at the direct expense of the rest of humanity. It's at the direct expense of these other societies and their sovereignty. And to me, like if this system could give everyone what it's given me, like if everybody had the same quality of life, access to healthcare and education and a home and transportation, like if it could do this for everyone on the planet, I would be the biggest proponent of this system. But I know that is not the situation. I know that, what I have is definitely nowhere close to what's being offered, even to most Americans, much less most people in Honduras or Central Africa. So it's, thinking people need to realize that just because they might think that they're comfortable and think that their lives, are pretty good, it's not, it's at the expense. Like there's a sacrifice that other people are making for that. And we don't need a system to do that. We can have a better system, that doesn't guarantee your happiness based on immiserating hundreds of thousands of millions of other people. Anyway.
Okay. 3 points. And I took the notes. You talked about Trump and his reputation, what is important to him. And a couple things merged there at the end in terms of talking about living at the expense of others. I'll address that first, since you were just now talking about that. I think that the percentage is probably far less than 10% that feel that they're doing well in the United States right now. And those who are doing relatively, at least they've got what they need. Maybe they're not having to live paycheck to paycheck, but many Americans, not most Americans, are now. How many millions are in debt because of their expensive degrees that get them nowhere, don't even get them a career that they planned. Americans are not doing well. The vast majority are not. They may have the appearance, and but they're surviving. And all they are one unfortunate behind collapsing what is their comfortable world. One medical situation, one loss in terms of their investments, one, any tragedy, personal tragedy in their lives. They're just away from finding out how difficult it is. There are so many people homeless in this country who once had what they felt was an adequate comfortable life. And all it took was a tragedy to happen, and then it spirals out of control. And I have to say, I believe that many Americans are going to start to find who are in that comfort zone, and thus they don't question, they don't care really about others, are going to all of a sudden finding themselves losing the very things, and it getting far worse in this country. When you talk about what is the American dream, I think that those people you described who are in, not in that top 10%, 5%, 3%, whatever, I think that the numbers are probably far less, that they aspire, their American dream is to aspire to be what their oppressors are. And that sets it up for this endless, elections, choosing in between this nonsensical party one and party two, not recognizing, as you very aptly said, very importantly, the class distinction. There's only two classes here. It's that ruling oligarch class and the rest of us. And just because a lot of those and the rest of us are doing okay doesn't mean that can't change. But so many Americans hold on to the fact that one day they're going to go better and better. And meanwhile, decade after decade, they're living their lives, but they're not really truly living. They are simply working for the day that they can retire. And you can forget about retirement in this country for many people. So I really think that's going to get worse. I do want to make a comment about, your thoughts in regards to Trump and caring about his, his reputation, his legacy, and all of that. I think that Trump is doing exactly what he was elected to do, not what people voted for him to do, being a non-interventionist and using all of those words. But I think he's doing actually about those who made sure that he was elected, financed that election. He's doing exactly what they want. People identify as some strong-willed person. On the contrary, I think he's a very weak man. I used to, and I will let our audience know, many years ago, I mean, this is just awful when I think about it, but many years ago, I used to think well of the man. Take it, this is many, many years ago. I read his books, and I admired a lot of the principles expressed in his books and how and so I have to say, seeing what he has become as a politician has shown me who the true person is and the true character. And that was very many years ago, but I actually thought he was intelligent. And now I see him for the stupid man he is. I don't think that his legacy and the things that you're talking about, yes, it's of course very important to him, but not in the way that you and I think about a world leader thinking about their legacy, because this man has a very distorted idea of what is important in life. And the things that are not important are the priorities in his life. And I do think, obviously, adulation is extremely important to him. But as long as he has the power, he can just continue to tell you how great you're doing and how great he is, enjoying the golden age of America. And as long as he is kept from any of the consequences, but I don't think he will be. I don't think the United States will be. But until then, until he actually starts suffering, and I mean his country suffering, will he perhaps question what he's doing, but not for the right reasons. I really don't think the man is very intelligent. I think he's really stupid. I thought so much more of him in many years ago again. But when you take a look at his social media and the way that he writes and his capital letters and thank you for bringing your attention to this matter, all this bunch of nonsense, the way that he talks. This is a stupid man, but he's doing exactly what he's supposed to do. He is surrounded by the warmongers, even in relation to Iran. There are people around him who want that war. As completely crazy as that is what they want. And really, it's a big joke among a lot of people, and you've heard it, I've heard it. Whoever is the last person to have spoken to Trump, that's the next thing coming out of his mouth. He has no independent thought, actually. He wants to present as he does, but he's a very dangerous man, because right now he is desperate, because he is losing in certain aspects that hegemony worldwide. And as BRICS grows, perhaps gets a, in commerce and and a currency of exchange, which they may very well do at their next meeting. He can come to threaten with this. That's why I laughed when I read his threats against Cuba. I laughed in this regard. All he has left is to talk about his stupid tariffs. But it's not working with the largest countries, and it is not working with countries that have dignity like Iran. None of this is going to work. I don't believe it's going to work with Cuba. I think that it is a matter of these countries maintaining it and not giving in at all to the United States. But he's a desperate man. Desperation makes somebody very dangerous. And I actually do think he is stupid enough, crazy enough to again attack Iran. But I think that again, I think we made reference to it earlier. There is going to be hell to pay, and Americans themselves are going to die, certainly at the U.S. military bases, should he do that. But even that, I don't think is the deterrence in terms of his legacy. I think he's really thinking about right now, and he's desperate. That means he can't even think about that legacy. He thinks he's going to go down as the best president ever. He's going to go down as the worst, and who knows what he might get this country into, and the devastation on the continental United States. And that's the one thing, and something you said earlier, Billy Bob, that Americans haven't had. They haven't had missiles. They haven't had bombs. They have not had death. They virtually got out of World War II unscathed. There were those who died, and respect to those who died, but it was a fraction of the deaths, the millions, tens of millions of Chinese and Russians, Soviets who died. They've never really suffered. Well, that suffering is going to start, and it's going to start in the people out there listening to us as well. Most of them are intelligent, and they know it. But most of those around you and your neighbors, they don't have a clue, and they don't want you to tell them either. But it's only when they start suffering, and that includes the government starts suffering. But remember, they are kept from it. As I said, Trump and the Congress, they are isolated from the repercussions that you and me, the everyday American, are going to suffer as a result. But anyway, there's my thoughts on a few things you said there.
I agree. I mean, especially with that last part, like they are, they're happy to pursue policies to benefit themselves, and at the expense of, the vast majority of the workers in the same, of the same country, and then globally, humanity globally. And so that's all they're doing, and that's the problem with oligarchy is, they have interests that are opposite to our interests, and they're going to pursue those, and they don't care really. Like, it's not going to be a big deal if, the war doesn't go well for them. I mean, how many things have we seen? Like Libya, they just want to destroy it. They don't care about the people of Libya, and they don't care about the people of Iran. They're not trying to free the people of Iran. Iran, the government of Iran, is an obstacle to their global and especially regional hegemony in that very important part of the world. And so, they can just blow it up, and they themselves, the Lindsey Grahams of the world, are going to not suffer any repercussions. I mean, they might, get beat in November. The Democrats might be able to use that and then, lie to people and convince them that the Democrats are an actual alternative or an actual opposition party, even though they're going to, once they get in office, they'll be doing the same policies. But it's easy to, when you have a two-party system and both parties are owned by the same people, it's easy to run on the failures of the other party and pretend that you're all different. When I've just seen that too many times. Like, I'm 50, and every news cycle, that's what it is. And Trump himself ran on being anti-establishment, and that's the only reason he was popular, because they knew that people were sick to death of this ruling oligarchy, both parties. And so, because Trump was able to stand on that stage, denounce them, denounce the establishment, that gave him serious street cred with a bunch of people. But we see now, it was all a lie. It was finding out what we want to hear and selling it to us to get in power so you can do the same thing. And guess what? Barack Obama did the same exact thing 8 years earlier. I mean, he did the same thing. Hope and change. I'm different. And people were crying when he was elected. They had tears. Oh my God, is this real? I can't believe it. And it was the same as it ever was. And so by now, people on both Republicans, Democrats, they need to have some cynicism, and they need to recognize what game is being played here. It's class war. It's oppositional class interests. It's the oligarchy opposing democracy, trying to maintain their global empire. And to do that, they're going to have to go after China, Russia, and Iran. And guess who's going to sacrifice? Not them. I'm yelling into the microphone because I'm angry.
Trump talks about the Western Hemisphere now to all this Monroe Doctrine nonsense, but he's not even limiting it to the Western Hemisphere. He's at the Eastern Hemisphere and the Middle East. And the only thing, and when I say Trump, we're talking about the entire U.S. government, okay? Do not, as you just now so aptly said, it's not a man. It is the entire essence of the United States, its government, okay? And it was set up this way. Don't go talking about pulling out some little phrases, as it was set up for exactly what it has become. And anything to the contrary has been conveniently ignored. So for what, 200 years, over 200 years. But, by the time they started to see what they could do with their hegemony, and only force stops such evil, only force. And that is why when we watch Iran and see what Pakistan might do, Russia, China, see what alliances, maybe some more military alliances might be in line here, because that's the only protection, as I said earlier, that a country has. If you don't have the nuclear weapons, or you're not aligned in a military agreement with a country that does, the United States will do whatever it wants to do to you. And the American people, well, most of them don't actually care. They will watch what's going on, and they'll be just like you said. They want to free the poor Iranian people. Well, the Iranian people are just fine. And you and I know very well the lies that are told to them about their societies. Everybody has a right to their sovereignty, their independence, their religious convictions. Every nation should be respected. I look at how Putin meets with all types of leaders, very different than, the Russian Federation and how it operates. Xi does the same thing, but they just meet with who your leader is, and out of respect, and you have these sovereign deals. The United States is not that way, and is not about to become that way. And only force in these military interventions that it's going to do might change their course, not because of right or wrong, not because people wake up, but just because they suffer. And suffering the Americans are going to do. I really believe it.
So, we're just describing an alternative worldview to the one that is, constantly being shoved down everybody's throat, constantly being propagandized around the world. But this alternative worldview, like you said, it's force that they recognize, and that is the only thing that keeps them. And that's why we as socialists, uphold the Soviet Union and the Red Army. Because and then we are sad that you had Khrushchev come in, and it just went downhill from then, culminating in Gorbachev. It's hard to say. Like, I just think he fell for their lies, basically. Like, it was a trap, it was a strategy. He believed them when they told him, hey, we're going to have peace through mutual prosperity, we're going to respect your sovereignty, NATO will not move 1 inch to the east. Like, he's a fool, but I think he was really, my analysis is that he was fooled, and that he trusted them, and he was naive to do that. He was ignorant. And it was a calamity. It was a colossal calamity for, humanity. Thankfully, there's other powers that, are even more strong, today than the Soviets were, especially economically. So there's optimism. There's hope. I think the decline of Western imperialism is inevitable. I think that's the trajectory we're going on. I think the events that are happening now demonstrate a desperation, on from the part of the West that understands that things are not going in their direction. And so the hope is that it goes out with a whimper and not a bang that, is very destructive to the planet and humanity. And it remains to be seen, because the West, they're kind of in charge of their own demise. And is it going to be catastrophic, or is it going to be facilitated in a good way, which does not, cause pain, suffering, and millions of deaths? Unfortunately, the West has a lot of power in determining, their own decline, and I'm scared that they're going to choose to go out with a bang and to pull out all the stops to try and maintain their empire. But inevitably, humanity is progressing and moving past this way of thinking. More and more people are waking up to the reality that we've talked about all show. And I appreciate this discussion, Christine, and your excellent analysis. Go ahead.
I know this is a perfect place for us to end our show, but you brought up the Soviet Union and its leadership. And this is the country that I love. I love its history. I particularly love all of the Soviet history, all of the Russian history. And, when you said those comments, about Khrushchev, evil Khrushchev, lying Khrushchev, the CIA even was able to benefit from Khrushchev and gave them ideas for them to concoct all of the lies that they did about Stalin. And when you spoke about Gorbachev, I've thought about that. No, we're digressing a little bit, but you bring up the country that I love most in this world. And when I think about those leaders and the succession of leaders, and by the time we got to Gorbachev, I would differ with you in this. I used to think as you did, and of course he was lied to. He was completely lied to. We know that as a fact. The documents prove it, regardless of what the U.S. Sometimes says. But at the same time, I don't believe that he was a communist, a socialist at heart whatsoever. I've read enough in his communications with others that make me seriously doubt that he was actually, he might be a member of the party at the time, but I don't think that those values were in him. So at the very least, you could say that made him naive and gullible, but you have no business being at that time, I'm talking about historically, in the Communist Party, if you're not actually a communist at heart. And no communist would have done the things that Gorbachev did. And of course, we see the very sad tragedy of what happened later and Yeltsin. But no, I really don't give him the benefit of doubt. I do know he was lied to, and I know he was duped, but it takes a certain non-committal to the principles in order to allow yourself to be duped.
Totally.
And as for right now, the Soviet Union, and looking back at the past, really showed how powerful a country can become against the odds, against everything against them. And there are lessons that need to be learned today by countries worldwide to take a look at what made them strong, because it can be restored. It can be brought back in new forms. But it's very important that we don't look at it as only something in the past and see what developed the strength. In fact, I believe that the beautiful Russian Federation that we have today, and Putin certainly saved Russia, but Stalin saved Russia. Both of those men saved Russia as we know it. And you can't separate one from the other. Different ideologies, different people growing up in their past and knowing what to do, and a different world situation. But nevertheless, the love for your people should be overriding. Stalin loved the people. Putin loves the people. And then it's a matter of these powerful men or others in other countries deciding, as long as the love of the people, as Stalin actually wrote about, is what's guiding you, then you're not going to fall for the Western lies. And that's the distinction. And I think we've had a great show as well, Billy Bob. We go all over the place, but it's all important and very, very thought-provoking, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you for those final comments. And I was gonna, I was triggered to say continue, but we better wrap it up. Thank you so much, Christine. We will reconvene with you the Friday after next. For who knows what episode it'll be, 190 or something by that time. But thank you so much, and thank you everyone for watching. We will see you guys then.